Hey everyone, 10 months ago I built my own Unraid NAS instead of buying an off-the-shelf one from UGREEN or Synology, and to be honest, it was love at first boot. But now that the honeymoon period is completely over, do I regret my decision? Should I have just bought an all-in-one NAS from Synology or UGREEN, or should I have gone with TrueNAS and then saved on the Unraid license fees? Well, to answer those questions, I first need to explain why I wanted a NAS in the first place. And technically I have always had a NAS, like many years ago I bought a Synology NAS which I used to store my family's pictures and important files and things like that. But to be honest, the hardware in that NAS is really slow and it's stuck to 1 gigabit networking. So if I did want to use that for my work, then I wouldn't be able to. So the process of how I do content creation is I sit down and I hit record on my camera, like I'm doing now, and I get a roll, and that might actually be like a 10 to 40 gigabit MP4 file. And in addition to that, I've also slowly but surely built up a library of common tech clips, as I like to call it. So if I'm building a computer and I'm installing a CPU, I actually record that step and then I put that in a folder. So if in a future video I talk about installing a CPU, I can just use that clip instead of, actually having to dismantle one of my computers and reinstall the CPU to use that clip in a new video. So in other words, for a typical video, I draw from sort of two sources. I've got my active project from, what I've actually filmed, and then I've got my library of common tech clips. And what I used to do was put all of those clips on my computer, but then when I was done with them, I try and actually put them on old hard drives and things like that for backup purposes, because obviously I was running out of space on my main computer. But that's not really a great workflow, and I actually lost various projects along the way due to actually constantly chopping and changing, where those project files were stored, on here or an external hard drive. And also this main PC has started to turn into a family computer, especially if my kids want to play like Wobbly Life or something like that. So it might be that, I want to edit a video and I can't because one of my kids is, playing a game. And that is where a NAS is perfect, because basically you have a separate storage box with loads of hard drives or, NVMEs or whatever, and then you hook it up to an Ethernet cable, and then basically all your other computers and your laptops can connect to that. So by shifting all of my projects and my common tech clips as well onto that NAS, suddenly I can edit anywhere. I could edit from my laptop, or I could go to a cafe and edit from there. And in addition to that being useful for work, many NASs also have lots of really useful features. You can actually back up all your files really easily to remote backup space, or you might want to back things up to Google Drive, or do the opposite. So if you've got Google Drive, you might want to back all that up to your local NAS, just in case Google goes full dictator and actually deletes your Google account and you lose all your data. And that is actually something that seriously concerns me, but I should say at this point, I love you YouTube. Please don't delete my account. So for me, a NAS makes perfect sense. I like having local control of things. I like tinkering. I like being able to put a, new networking card in if I want to upgrade from like 2.5 gig to 10 gig networking. And you might be thinking, well, you can do that on a normal computer anyway. But in reality, many, normal gaming computers have a massive graphics card that covers a lot of the other PCI Express slots. And as a result, if in here I wanted to put like a 10 gig networking card, I might not be able to do that. And actually I've run into that issue in the past, whereas with a NAS, things are sort of built and designed a bit differently, so there is more expansion capability. So then we come to the question of, should I build my own NAS or should I buy an off-the-shelf one? But one of the things people say is that if you build your own, it's a lot more expensive. But often I find that when I run the figures, it's not as expensive as some people might think. So a UGREEN NAS might be £260 for example, and that will come with an Intel N100 CPU, which is like a cut down 4-core CPU. And to be honest, if you go on eBay, you can actually find like a bundle of, an Intel CPU, motherboard and RAM for probably around £100 or £150 due to RAM prices going up. And that probably will offer you more power than actually if you did buy a NAS at the $200 to $300 or pound, price point. The only main downside though is that if you actually compare the CPUs, the consumer CPU, that you bought from eBay will probably be more power hungry than the one in the NAS, but then it's more powerful, so there is a bit of a trade-off. But I guess my point here is that in general, if you build your own, then that can actually work out well. You can get more power for the same cost or less, and then you get more future-proofing capability because you've actually got a computer system there with a standard motherboard that you can then do other things with. And the other thing is the actual flexibility element, because I was planning things out and I kind of realized I had two different use cases. For my content creation, I've got my active project like I've got now that I'm filming on, so I'll be actively editing that, and ideally I want this project on an NVMe drive, but then when I'm done with it, I can just move it to a hard drive and just forget about it, but at least it's there if I did need it as well. And you can get much bigger NASs from like Synology and Terramaster and UGREEN that do offer like, lots of hard drive bays and also NVMe support, but with all of those options, there's flaws with them. So with, the Synology options, they're usually quite expensive and the hardware is quite weak. And as you can kind of tell, I like tinkering, I like building computers and stuff, and as a result, it made sense for me to build my own NAS as well. So I went on eBay and Facebook Marketplace price and I started hunting for deals, and I found an old, like 10-year-old gaming computer, which is actually perfect for the base of an Unraid system. And I also bought a massive server case that was on clearance, and I put all this together, and basically I ended up with my NAS, which at the time had 4 hard drives, and each of them were 12 terabytes, and then I put 2 4TB NVMe drives in there, which I bought before the prices skyrocketed, so I kind of got lucky there. But anyway, at that point I've actually got my NAS built, and now I need to do something with it. And one of the things I could have done is just install Windows or Linux on it and actually configure the drives myself. You know, I could have had the 4 drives there, set up some form of software RAID, and then expose that as a file share. And I have actually tried that in the past, but the reality is it doesn't work out all that well. Like if you're doing cable management and then you switch the order of the SATA cables, then suddenly your operating system isn't going to see those drives anymore. And yeah, that solution is quite clunky. So really it's better to go with a NAS specific operating system, at least in my opinion. So I did loads of research and I came up with TrueNAS, OpenMediaVault and Unraid, and at this point it's really a personal perspective. I know there's fans of each of those softwares, so I'm not going to sort of dunk on any of them, but at the time when I was actually doing my research, it looked like OpenMediaVault was less beginner friendly and a bit less intuitive in some areas compared to, TrueNAS and Unraid. And even though I used to be a software developer and I've got, server admin experience and things like that, because this NAS was going to be for my business and I really wanted stability and I didn't want to tinker loads, I thought, OpenMediaVault might not be suitable for me. So I eliminated that as an option, and then I looked at TrueNAS a lot more. And I almost went with that because it is fast, the ZFS file system and the data integrity options are really, really good. But at the time, they were actually transitioning how their Docker containers were implemented, and even the TrueNAS, subreddit was full of people complaining that, their stable Docker containers that had been working for years had suddenly been sort of killed off and crashing and things like that. And I was also conscious that, even Linus, who has a massive company and decades of experience in tech, even he gets frustrated with TrueNAS sometimes, and that's why he invested in HexOS, which is basically a wrapper on top of TrueNAS. And you can either use the user-friendly HexOS, UI, or you can drop down to the actual TrueNAS base if you wanted to do that. But there's a few problems with that, and I'm not going to go into them too much, but essentially there's more points of failure. And actually if TrueNAS implements a new feature, HexOS also needs to support that, because otherwise you're not going to be able to use that feature. So in general, I'm not really a fan of any wrapper like that. Like for me, I just want to keep things simple. So I eliminated that as an option as well, and I bought an Unraid license that was on sale, and then I bought this Epic t-shirt at the same time. But was that the right decision? And obviously I mean the licenses, because this t-shirt is based. I'm so cool. And 10 months on, I'm happy, genuinely. While Unraid isn't perfect, which I'll talk about in a minute, in general, I've been really happy with how Unraid has worked out for me. The install process was simple, the UI is simple, and everything just works. The communities have also been really helpful anytime I've needed support, and there's also lots of updates, and that's always good to see, because you don't really want to buy into an ecosystem, even if it's free, and then find there's only like 1 or 2 software updates a year. And I won't go into every feature that I ended up using, but I very quickly found a few community apps that were really useful, so I installed them right away and started using them, and I also enabled Docker containers and installed a few different ones. For example, Postgres, I installed that, and then I store all my DaVinci projects on there, so in a centralized mode, and then, whether I edit on this computer or my laptop, there's like a central source there, instead of having all my DaVinci project local, and that can become a nightmare. I also finally protected myself from Google being Google, and actually my entire Google Drive is backed up to my Unraid NAS every single night. So if Google does, decide to ruin my life, then at least my files are backed up locally. And since I was on a roll, I also decided to try out Plex. I know there's a debate between Plex and Jellyfin, but I got the free version of Plex and it works really well for me so that me and my family can watch public domain movies and TV shows. Obviously I wouldn't download any TV shows that were, copyrighted or anything like that, but for public domain things, it's completely brilliant to put those on Plex and me and my family can watch them whenever we'd like. And yes, I know you can do that with like Synology and TrueNAS and everything else, but I guess my point here is that, Unraid is so powerful and there's so many features and it's so stable and it doesn't, break when I upgrade things, that I've got more confidence in my home labbing capability and, I can sort of play and install different things with the knowledge that hopefully things aren't going to break in a future update. So in general, I'm really happy with Unraid. Certain things are clunky and certain community apps are out of date and, they don't work on the latest versions and things like that. But in general, it is good and I really like that I've gone with Unraid. So that wraps up my thoughts. Sometimes I like doing these reflection videos. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up button and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.